This chase scene with Sarah Michelle Gellar, the Helen sequence is iconic. I think it's considered one of the best chase sequences, I think, in horror history, and I kind of agree with that. It's just such a great set piece in the film. But for you, just how much of it came directly from the script, and did you have concerns about maybe bringing it to life in the film when you did sit down and read the script for the first time?
No, in truth, and I think when you do action, it's you can write anything, and then the reality of where you're shooting it, the budget that you have, the capabilities of your performers, all those things then start to impact on the original idea. So with action, and I've always felt this, you have to get the location. And yeah, you know the rough beats, and Kevin had written a chase sequence, and it was a bit like what the finished thing was, but it was also very different.
Yeah.
But the intention was the same. But there was so much that he had written that either I felt wasn't quite tonally right for our movie, or it was physically impossible to achieve. There's a perfect example in the back of the car, in the very beginning of the sequence, when the car stops. Kevin had written a scene in which the fisherman gets into the car and he drives off, and they have a fight in the car and a car crash, but you never see the fisherman's face throughout this whole sequence. And I just said, dude, this is impossible to do, because the confines of that police car, for us to stage the action with the fisherman's hat and not see him, I said, it's just going to restrict the sequence so much that I just said, I'm not going to do that. We'll do something else. And Kevin, I think, then used the sequence in Scream 2, I think.
I was going to say, yeah, that's very similar to what we see there.
And similarly, there's the beat. Yeah. So he sort of repurposed it quite correctly, because it was a really good scene. It just wasn't right for our circumstances. And the same was true of part of the sequence in the store. Kevin has written a beat where Sarah tries lots of different weapons when she goes through the department store. And again, to me, tonally, that wasn't right for what I wanted to do. It was a little more comedic. And I think that ended up in Scream 2 or 3 as well. And it works really well in that film. But it just wasn't going to be the thing that I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be not comedic at all at this point in the movie. And our movie wasn't Scream, and I didn't want it to be Scream.
Yeah.
But the location itself dictated so much of how we actually staged the piece, the store, everything that happened round about it. We shot in 2 or 3 different locations to stitch the sequence together. But the store itself, I staged all of the action to what we had in that store. And one of the reasons I even chose the store was that it had this really old wooden hand-cranked elevator in the back of the store. And I just fell in love with it the minute I saw it. And I thought, we can use this in that sequence. So pretty much the whole sequence was built round about the fact that we had this really cool thing in the store.
I know in the commentary you talked a little bit about even how that had its own set of problems, like the rope wasn't right, and Sarah, I think her hands got a little
and for Sarah, God bless her, she's the one who had to pull the damn thing, and it was, the fibers were like fiberglass. They just would go right into her hands. We coated her hands in a special sort of solution that meant it was a bit like a kind of rubber on her hands to protect them, but it still wasn't perfect. And that was having replaced the rope. But she was a real trooper, and she just got on with it,
And obviously the casting of Helen, getting Sarah for this role is so important to it, because she has to kind of be this balance between the beauty queen, the popular girl, whatever comes with that kind of stereotype, but also be someone that we're really rooting for to survive in this sequence in particular. Just, can you talk a little bit about the casting process for her specifically, and maybe how many people did you see before deciding on Sarah?
Oh, I mean, I couldn't even tell you how many young actresses, and many of them, I won't name them here, but many of them went on to huge careers.
Yeah.
There was 2 Oscar winners came in as well, who I didn't cast. But I don't know, Sarah came in very late in the day. I think she was not available for us to see because she was shooting the pilot for Buffy. So initially she was on our radar, but she wasn't available to come in and meet on it until very late in the process. I'd cast virtually everyone else in the movie. I'd screen tested, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 different young actors for this role. No one just popped in the right way. There's lots of really good people.
Yeah.
But finally we got to within weeks of starting, and I got it down to like 3 who I really liked, and we flew them out to North Carolina. One of them was Sarah, and she came and we did a screen test. We shot 2 sequences. One was just a little snippet of when she does the beauty pageant, and the other was part of this scene. It was the back of the car, and I had her in the back of the police car, and we shot 3 different actors for that. And to me, she wasn't my favorite going in of the 3. I thought I knew who it was going to be. As soon as she was on film, it was, there wasn't a question. It was her. She just came right off the screen, and I went back to the studio and said, she's not the one everyone's expecting, but it's got to be her. And thankfully they agreed, and she came in. But you're right, she brings such a warmth and a likability and a believability to who Helen is. And particularly in this sequence, she sells it.
Yeah.
She really does. Because she's just really game for doing everything that I asked of her in very cold conditions, in a flimsy little dress and all of that stuff. But she can scream too, and we needed that. So she's central to why the sequence works.
Yeah, no, she is a scream queen, and we love her in this. And can you talk a little bit about what some of the challenges were for this sequence? I know on the commentary you talk about, Sarah having to deal with the heels, the hands, which we touched on, the rig for Elsa's body when she's getting dragged along, and just what I guess was maybe one of the more challenging aspects of this whole set piece.
Well, the whole sequence was quite, it was a real jigsaw puzzle of pieces.
Yeah.
Just because of technical reasons, things like, the rigs for Bridget and all of that stuff was, but it's just filmmaking. There's always problem through these things. The locations, we shot in 2 different towns to get this together. So basically the sequence is in 3 sections. First section with the car in the alleyway was Southport in North Carolina. Then when she runs away from the car, we cut away to Love Hewitt at home. and I think loves on the computer finding out a bit of information. And then we cut back and Sarah's running around a corner. And now I'm in Burgall. And we shoot the whole of that sequence in and around the store in Burgall up until she throws herself out the window and runs off. And as soon as she comes past camera, I cut back to Love Hewitt again. And she's in the theatre this time. And then when we come back, we pick up Sarah running down the alleyway. And that's now back in Southport.
I was gonna say, it's the same alley, right?
It's the exact same location that we did the first sequence in. Only now we dressed it with, a big oil tanker and various trucks and built a little wall sequence that would match so that it looked when she turned. We had to redress it twice, actually, because when Sarah runs up and stops and there's fireworks that go above her, and there's a big, I think it's a big petrol truck there.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly the same space that we're about to see her turn into and run down. We got rid of all that stuff, redressed it again, so that the alleyway that is blocking is now revealed. And we have Sarah turn into that where all the tires are and the fisherman ultimately is. So there was lots of piecing of it together. And I storyboarded quite a bit of it. But we were blessed because it was very difficult to shoot. I didn't get everything that I wanted.
Mm.
And one of the things that delayed us during the initial shoot was that the Steadicam operator that we had initially, he just didn't deliver on the night, and the footage wasn't really usable.
Ugh.
So we hired Larry McConkey, who is famous for doing the tracking shot in Goodfellas with Scorsese. We flew him in from LA and we went back to Burgall and reshot all of the fishermen crossing the town square, Sarah crossing the town square. But also we went back inside and I picked up some shots that I didn't get for when the fisherman comes onto the top level, walks towards us. And at that stage, Gary Wisner, my production designer, had redressed it with a bunch of mannequins with all the plastic covering it, which we didn't have the first time we shot it. And it just transformed it. It made it so much spookier. So it was kind of a blessing. But it didn't work out because we got to go back and get it right.
And that's such like a crucial moment, even in the trailers with the coming out of the plastic and all that.
Yeah.
And, obviously, when I watch this movie, I'm always rooting for her to survive, even knowing that that's not going to happen. But do you recall the reaction, like in the theater, the first time people saw it? How did people react to this death scene at the time?
Oh, I had the great pleasure of, on opening night, as I said earlier, we kind of toured all of the theatres in LA, the producers and I, and we went round and we started at like 11 a.m. in the morning. And trust me, nobody goes to the movies at 11 a.m. on a Friday morning.
No.
So we told the story that there was no one there. But the whole day went on and we built and we built and we built until we got to Universal City Walk, and it was like the 10:30 or the 11 p.m. screening, and it was mobbed. And I sat in the front row, way over on the right, and I just watched the audience. And it was absolutely fantastic to see their reaction. It's a very different experience with a live audience than it is, in a screening room with executives and producers. And you just really don't know. Even at our test screening, in test screenings, loads of people go to multiple test screenings. So they become almost like a professional audience. And when you put it in front of a real audience, you get for the very first time a real reaction. And there was two moments that really stood out. One was the very end of the movie when the fisherman burst through the glass. The whole audience came right out of the seat and left the film kind of gasping, which was fantastic for us. But the other point was the sequence. And it was the opposite reaction. It wasn't a scare. We had moments of that throughout the sequence. But I always remember very clearly that when Helen died and the band disappeared and you're just left on the empty alleyway, there was just utter silence.
Mm-hmm.
And then we cut to Love Hewitt and she's running through the crowd. But there was also no music at that point. The music stops. And I think when we put this, when John Debney did the score, he was very, very smart in where he stopped the music as much as where the music came in.
Yeah.
There's 2 or 3 beats where there is no music, it's just silence and sound effects. And it really helps. And the very ending of it, I think is really powerful, partly for that reason. Plus, I don't think the audience believe we're going to kill her.
Right? It's like she makes it so far, you're just like, she's going to make it. And
yeah,
then,
no, I mean, how can you go through 7 minutes of hell and then she gets killed anyway?
And for you, how does it feel to know that this is regarded as one of the best, horror chase scenes that I think is out there?
Oh, I mean, obviously, it's a huge, delight for me, and it's kind of humbling to know that after 25 years, the sequence still works. I mean, I watched for this interview, and I haven't watched it for a long time, and it does still work.
Yeah, it's great.
It really holds up. And again, as I said earlier, that's to a great extent down to Sarah, just because you want her to survive. You really do care about her through this whole sequence. She isn't just a body. She's a real person, a real character. So, when we lose her, it's so powerful. And it really helped the film massively because the audience now were completely captivated and believed that in that end sequence of the film, that anything could happen. And that's really important. It wasn't a case of, well, the hero's going to win and the hero's going to kill the bad guy and yada, yada. There was a real expectation that they just weren't sure how it would turn out. And this sequence had a huge part to play in that.
Yeah. And, after rewatching it recently, I guess, is there anything else about filming this sequence that maybe did come back or you did want to share at this time before I did wrap things up?
In terms of, sorry, could you repeat that?
Oh, sorry, just like, was there anything that maybe your mind went back to while you were filming it that maybe you haven't talked about in a while, or you wanted to give you the opportunity to share anything else about this sequence while I have you?
Well, I mean, not really, because the sequence is pretty much exactly as intended.
Yeah.
The great joy of that is that it actually works, because so often, trust me, you go out to shoot something and you get back in the cutting room and you put it together and it doesn't quite land. There are so many elements that have to work together. The cinematography has to be right, the music has to be right, the actors have to be right. Everything about it, the pacing of the scene is very critical. I remember when the film was released, there were a couple of reviewers who critiqued this sequence because I cut away from it. They felt we should have stayed with it. And in my opinion, they couldn't be more wrong. It was so important that we cut away.
Yeah.
But to be honest, there was also a couple of technical reasons for that. Those are the cuts from location to location.
Right.
So stitching them together is so much easier when you just have a cutaway to something else. But I also wanted the audience to be going, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And then, what? And you watch Jennifer Love Hewitt for 20 seconds.
It's seconds, yeah.
Every second. And then you come back and you're back in. And I think it really helped the tension. It didn't diminish it at all.